wanted to do I wanted to do a demonstration where we take like some invisible stuff like on gloves and then watch how people go in Walmart.
Yeah.
I wanted to do that and then.
Hi, how are you? Yeah, good to see you too. Yeah, good. Any what?
Monitor? Yes. So it's gonna be working on the stream, but it here.
Yeah, we won't hear ourselves.
Oh, yeah. No,
I'm gonna step back there and help you fix that. Thank you.
That is perfectly fine. Actually, that helps take the pressure off a ton, actually.
Oh, yeah, I
Because
don't want
this
to
feels
hear
like
myself.
We're having a conversation.
Yeah, I don't want to hear what I sound like. That's just going to bother me.
Agreed, Janine, agreed.
I know exactly how I've
you.
learned now from 1/2 semester of teaching online exactly how nasal my voice is.
All right, when you're ready.
How many ums I drop per sentence.
Oh, that's about to be me right now.
You're
I
gonna
am
be
ready
great.
when we're ready. I don't know.
Hold on.
Are we on? Are we good?
Okay. Check,
Great.
check,
Great.
check.
Thank you, sir.
Well, hi everyone. Welcome to our panel discussion for I Can't Breathe documentary that just aired for CJMM Memorial. I will just take a moment to have our panelists introduce themselves. I don't know.
I'll go first.
Okay.
My name is Janine Weeks-Schroer. I am a associate professor of philosophy specializing in race and racism at University of Minnesota Duluth.
I guess I'll go next. My name is Glenn Simmons Jr. I'm an assistant professor at the University of Minnesota Medical School, Duluth campus. I'm a cancer researcher and a community-based participatory researcher as well in health disparities. There you go.
My name is Daniel Oluwaseyi Oyinloye. I am co-founder of Dance and Creatives, an organization that specializes with telling stories around different subjects, but especially within the Black community.
And hi, I am Sandra Bentor Oyenloye, and I am also co-founder of Dance and Creatives. And we're excited to be doing this today. Before we even get into questions, I was really curious as to, well, not even curious, I just felt like I needed to ask, how are you all doing? You know, there's a lot going on. I know everyone just took a breath because there's a lot going on, and I'm sure we're feeling a lot of different things. But I thought that, we can't really continue this conversation without just, creating that space for how are you all doing today in general?
I'm glad to be here. It has been another day where it was hard to face the world, but I'm glad to be here.
That's real.
Honestly, and I've said it before, really only in kind of protected spaces am I really allowed to be honest about this. I don't feel any different. I feel a lot of the same that we've experienced. I feel a lot of the same things that we've experienced from learning history, kind of diving into the history books, from the transatlantic slave trade to the different, why was the transatlantic slave trade so different than any other slavery that had ever been seen in the world before and since. And it's the same feeling, it's almost like chronic inflammation. It's like I'm always there anyway. So I don't feel that different. I'm almost incensed, with the idea that everybody else feels different all of a sudden. It's like, but this is unfortunately normal. So welcome to the insanity, So, yeah.
Every time moments like this happen for me, I try to figure out how to respond to that question. And to be honest, I don't know how to respond to that question. I just know that I'm feeling a lot of different things. But the thing about it is, in context to even just this production that we just watched, it's like having to watch and while you're watching and editing, getting news that someone just got hung.
Yeah.
At the same time, it's like, do I get time to even put this in the documentary and tell the story too? And then the moment this is over, who knows what's gonna happen next? So just that unsettling feeling of the story is never finished. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's how I feel. I feel like I was telling everybody, oh, don't call me after 2 days after this, I'm gonna be sleeping. But I'm like, I don't even know if I'm gonna be sleeping. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the way I feel. Like, we always are put in a position where we gotta respond with our voice, with our bodies, and not necessarily just responding to the hate or to the world, like Glenn said, but it's like a purpose or obligation of sorts, that it's a part of our calling to just respond. So that's how I'm feeling.
Well, thank you all for sharing. I feel all of your everything that you all said is kind of captures how personally I'm feeling. I had a phone call earlier today with Teresa Moses, and as I was talking to her, I was telling her that, you know, I'm in this place where I feel this heavy weight, but it's not a place where this weight seems like, you know, something that has just been placed. You know, it's like, it's a weight that's always been there, but now I'm thinking about it, right? I'm thinking about it more, or I have to think about it more because of, you know, the current events and
That is so real.
Yeah, and kind of the how we've been just constantly re-traumatized, you know, and just how every time that happens, there's just, it feels like there's more pressure being added to something that is already there, you know, and that's the best way that I could describe it. Yeah, I just thank you all for sharing again. I just felt like it was very important that, that we be in space together and kind of acknowledge that, you know, even as we're here doing this, that we are carrying a lot too, and we're processing a lot in this time, and there's things going on in real time. So thank you for being here.
Appreciate that.
Yeah. The documentary aired just less than 30 minutes ago. It ended. And it talks about just, you know, a broad range of things, right? But mostly police brutality and kind of where we are as Black people. And, you know, a segment of that is also in Duluth, right? A lot of the times there's this them and us narrative of like, oh, all of this stuff is happening down in Minneapolis, you know, all of this stuff is happening over there. And, oh, you know, we're not seeing that. Like, no one has been killed in the Duluth streets, you know, other than the lynching that, you know, we are always talking about.
Just the one time,
you know?
like not another time.
That literally 10,000 of us came together to participate in. So I was just curious because in the documentary, a lot of people in Duluth shared their experiences here, right? And I'm curious to know, like, what are some of your experiences in this city, as far as racial dynamics or how you walk? And you shared that, you know, there are limited spaces where you can literally be honestly yourself, you know, and speak on topics in a real and raw form. Is that something that's what you experience here? Like, what's kind of the overall experience here since you've been here?
Yeah, I'll kick this one off.
And you haven't been here that long, right?
I haven't been here that long, right? You know,
Yeah.
I'm one of those people who really enjoys being involved in whatever community I live in. That's just kind of part of my upbringing.
And how long have you been here?
So it's been just over 3 years now.
Okay.
Yeah, and the first thing I noticed was, and with every city has its racial boundaries, and Duluth was kind of interesting in the sense that you don't see it right away because the numbers are so small, you know, whether it's Native or whether it's, you know, Black Americans, it's so small. But once you get used to it, you see it's still there. It's very clear. You know, 6th Avenue is a very, very hard, you know, divide. And anyone who's on the east side of it, you know, definitely tends to be a little bit better off. And everyone to the west tends to be a little worse off. That's the tendency. And you don't see conversations that are happening that talk about changing that. You just don't see that happening, not from the highest levels. And unfortunately, as an academic, I'm always in a space where I'm on the east side. I'm always on the east side. I come to the west side, and then I go back to the east side. And that's been what it's been. And it's sad because it doesn't need to be that way, because in theory, there's so little that needs to be done to change that compared to the Chicagos, compared to the Dallases or the LAs. And Duluth is definitely very much so divided on a racial line that those who know about it don't talk about it, and those who don't know about it, they don't know. So what are they going to do? So I would say, in wrapping up my response that's long-winded already, it's a lot of benign neglect, in the sense that if it doesn't affect you, you're not going to do anything about it. And unfortunately, that means sometimes that's white folks, and sometimes it's people of color that do it as well. So it's not always that easy to fix, because you have perpetrators that are kind of on both camps. So, yeah.
I grew up in a town with pretty similar demographics a long time ago. So I've lived in a town that was mostly white and had this very particular kind of Midwestern Northern racial politic since I was 8. Because I was raised by the generation of black folk who were heavily invested in respectability politics, and were committed to the idea that if you just played your role, played the game right, things would be okay. I have a system that works really well. You don't pay attention when people stare at you. You say sir and ma'am to everybody. You're polite all the time. I've said this before, but after watching the documentary and thinking about it, I really think it captures something. I act like I'm a guest. I act like good guests act. You're polite and pleasant and fun. You don't cause any trouble, and you watch for signs that people want you out, and you go as soon as you see them. That's a way to navigate. It's growing thin.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what you describe, and I was on Twitter. I'm on Twitter again, because of a lot of this.
We all are, right?
We're on Twitter.
We're all back on Twitter.
I'm all thumbs. And one of my friends who's a professor in the southwestern part of the country, I won't say where exactly, because I don't know how much people know about what he says on Twitter. He posed a question about what you're describing, that behavior that you take to be okay, to make everyone else feel at ease, and almost kind of putting yourself into a box. And my response to his tweet was, it basically brings into question that nature versus nurture argument, because you do it long enough, you don't know that you're somebody else anymore. At one point I was probably a lot more shy than I am now. Right. But I realized that if I didn't become vocal, but vocal in a certain way, right, then nothing would happen. I would be completely, disenfranchised. I would be completely disavowed of being even in the room. Right. So you're right. Yeah, it's like being in a hotel room.
Right. I mean, we're both academics, and there's a lot of introverted, reserved people in academia, but you can't get a job as a black person if you won't speak up, and like you said, in a particular way, articulately, but not show-offy, pleasant, fun, condescending.
Team player.
Yeah.
Fit.
Right. I fit so well. They thought.
Sorry, I missed the question, so.
Did you? Well, the question was just around your experiences in Duluth. And Glenn started and shared that he'd been here for 3 years, and shared a little bit about, what he's seen, what he's experienced, and so did Janine.
For me, it was like, Duluth was like it's very important I contextualize it well, because it's like, you have to understand I came to the United States in 2002. And after I came to the United States, my interaction with this space, I'm not just talking about this space in Minnesota, but the United States period, was at South High School, because that was where I spent most of my time. And that's literally blocks from where all this stuff went down with George Floyd, I believe. And you look at that, and I came right after South High School. I realized with everything going on in the family life, I wanted to go to Duluth because it was 2 hours away. I applied to Duluth, I applied to Twin Cities campus, and I applied to St. Thomas. That was my first choice, actually. But St. Thomas said I wasn't good enough, so I decided I would go to UMD, just 2 hours away. I got into Twin Cities and here, but I decided to go a little bit away from home because I was trying to find myself in a way. I got to Duluth, and I'm an African kid who just began to unveil what racism is in the context of America. And I wasn't too deep into it yet. So when I came to Duluth, it would become the catalyst in my story because it helped me define what racist behavior was. It helped me understand white supremacy, and it really helped me begin to explore how I was being interacted with, and how I was being responded to. Because sometimes if you're not aware of it, you just live like, oh yeah, well, it's probably me. I probably got to do better this way, or I got to do this better. And that was me before Duluth. And Duluth changed that for me, actually, because it wasn't too long when I came to Duluth where everything began to unveil. I was a mechanical engineering major at the time. But the first week of class was impossible. Not because I was not smart, because I am smart, and we all are smart. Actually, okay, I won't go into that. But we all are smart. But the concept is, but because I started saying that what happens when you have a question, or when you need help, or when you want to understand a concept, what happens for me is different from what happens to everybody else. For example, measurement. I had issues with figuring out what measuring metric they were using in class, because I came from Nigeria, and it was, I think, kilometers, or we had kilometers was our measuring norm in our societal language. And then the teacher would throw meters or throw some other term out, and I'm like, okay, cool, I hear you, but I don't even know how to convert that right now in my head, so let me figure this out on my phone or something, like, do something else to add to it. Or ask my partner, and I'll ask my friend, or not my friend, my sitmate, and he will be like, I don't know. And then we have a in-class worksheet to work on right there with measurement. And I'm like, okay, should I pull out my phone? Should I do this? And here he is just solving the problems, and everything is fine. And, and I just wanted to understand the metric system. And so what I did is, being a young 17-year-old kid in college, I was like rebellious enough to just check out, and I checked out. So the first week of class in mechanical engineering classes, what I would do is, because one, socially, I didn't feel comfortable enough to interact with more people, or to dig deeper into content, or to even step up to ask the teacher questions, I would just check out. And I found it convenient enough for me to continue to check out over and over and over again, and spend all my time still productive. Actually, as a matter of fact, my filmmaking base happened in that time. I spent all my time in the lab editing films. So while I was checking out in my mechanical classes, where I was still trying to pull through, still trying to learn the softwares on my own, still trying to read the text and still make meaning of it, and still trying to talk to teachers who, when I actually ask questions, would respond to me in a very senile way, or like, just, why don't you know this material type of way, or like, this is, I'm not here to babysit you, but, like, figure this shit out on your own. And I'm like, I'm trying, but that's not the kind of help I need. So they turned me off, and the way they went about teaching me that content turned me off from mechanical engineering. So I said, well, in America, I guess my calling is not mechanical engineering. And I switched it to filmmaking, or digital arts and photography at the time, because UMD doesn't have a film class. But just my major and the path I took in my life was defined by the interactions I had. And that, to me, was my introduction to what I could even be in this space. Because I felt like if I persisted, if I really wanted to be a mechanical engineer, I could have still done that. I could have found my networks. I could have started a club. you know, like a study club, or like, you know, went to the multicultural center, found all the engineering students I know that are in the senior year. I could have done those organizers, but I didn't have the energy. I wasn't willing to, and I was defining my experiences by what I really wanted to do in that moment. So for me, I felt like it was also unveiling that my true calling wasn't mechanical engineering; it was storytelling. So that's the premise. UMD was the catalyst to like racial issues from sports, going to play sports and being assumed to be the black team that starts fight every year, to living in the dorms and having people make racial comments about you, to having your friends get treated like, get called names and being bullied on social media, to having to go support your friends because you're not sure of their safety. And all of these things were happening in our younger years at UMD. And when we asked questions to the school, or we told the school to protect us, what they would tell us is to go to the multicultural center, or they point to the multicultural center. And it was always the only response the school as an institution had, was the multicultural center. They weren't solving our problems. They weren't challenging white supremacy. They weren't making any statements about white supremacy. They just kept saying, oh, we have support for you. Go to the multicultural center. Well, it ended up happening that I worked at the multicultural center after school, because that was the only place I could go, and that was the only place that empowered me as a person in Duluth. But as a worker at UMD in the multicultural center, I even realized how more difficult it was to be a staff at UMD than it was to even be a student. Because staffs are not supported, your ass is on the line, you don't know if you're gonna pay your rent if you like say, fuck this shit, I can't do this shit. No, but sorry about the kids, close your eyes. But it's like, you don't know what you're going to do. It's like you're always uncertain that you're trying to protect your job, at the same time you're trying to protect the kids, and it's like there is no way to do both. So you got to figure out to go all out for the kids and be like, I'm gonna just do anything, say anything, but even with that, you don't have enough energy, enough resources to back you. So I don't know, but my long answer is racism in Duluth is so far from just calling someone the N-word, or is so far and so deep and so much more creating a platform for something really worse that could happen. And that's the issue I have, is Duluth does not experience a lot of the physical aspects of what racism could do. They have in some aspects. We've seen some videos. I've been arrested before I turned 25 for telling the police officer not to put his hands on his gun. So we've had some physical things, but my story will never be told, and nobody was ever going to amplify my story, because there's many people in Duluth, black and brown folks, with that same story that I had. But it's like, well, we just took you to jail and pepper sprayed you. That's not a big deal. We didn't kill you. And so if Duluth doesn't have an event that shifts that paradigm, we'll always keep thinking there is no problem in Duluth. And that's my problem in Duluth, is every day is an interaction that gives voice to white supremacy, that makes black voices drown, and ultimately the progress and the retention of black folks in this community is 0 to none.
Right.
And so you have a circle environment where black and brown folks just cannot stay here. We can't leave here, and we keep finding a way out.
And what you're describing is this kind of satisfied vampirism, where for every member of the community, every black folk in this in the area, you're dribbling off a tremendous amount of energy just to keep trying to do the basic thing that you were trying to do. If you don't do what you did, which was change course so that you have enough resources to actually see yourself succeed.
Right.
That's the thing that, from the internal context of UMD as an institution, that I have grown deeply weary of, is the sort of unapologetic willingness to sort of not just suck off the energy of black and brown people, but to throw it away.
You know, one of the things that came up as you were speaking, Daniel, is just the idea of the protection that you have. And there's some stuff, there's a lot of energy that's been built up around this, which could be, I'm going to use a dirty word, capitalized on, that will allow some things to happen that have been in the works for decades already, which could be good. But the issue is that those people who may be able to do those things, those people, basically the grown folks, are actually the most vulnerable. You know, we have the most understanding of what needs to happen. We've been through it. We see the ins and outs. But if we step out, your paycheck is on the line, your livelihood is on the line, and in some cases your life is on the line. But you have students who in an academic setting are the customer. So have, even when they're marginalized, have the most protection of a marginalized group, which is weird to think about. And recently students have approached me and said, this is what we're doing. And I'm like, keep doing it, because I can only do what I'm doing in this context.
Right.
Because we already know what they're going to do
Right.
if I step up. And that's crazy. It's crazy to think about it, because that's the end result of trying to push and knowing that that pushing isn't going to go anywhere, is that most people with any logical brain will say, you know, I'm going to push over here, where if I push it up the hill, it's going to stay up the hill. It's not going to roll back on me like Sisyphus or something, you know? And, you know, I don't, man. Yeah, I've only been here for 3 years, so. But I've seen everything. And one other thing, and I'll say this because I know we want to get to the next question, but there's a certain aspect of this that comes from normalization, or what's allowed to be normalized. When I first came to Duluth, I'm like a pseudo hippie sometimes. I will just go places and I will just squat. I will just be sitting there. You won't know who I am. I mean, you see my hair. Most of the times people think I'm a student at best, you know, and I have to tell them, like, no, I'm grown and I teach students, whether they like it or not. I teach them.
Yeah. They're never gonna believe you.
Well, yeah, no, and that's okay. I don't care. Black don't crack, right? But when I came across another black person, until I got my hands on people's phone numbers and I knew where they were, the only people of color, the only black folks that I was seeing looked like they were going through. And I don't think that's by accident. You know, I think there's a certain amount of conditioning that happens to our middle class, our well-to-do black folks, where they're like, I'm not about to be on the street. But what ends up happening is that all of these white folks, even the good intentioned white folks, that's the only thing they're seeing. And so they're conditioned to think, it's like, are you okay? And there's nothing more infuriating than for somebody to ask you if you're okay. It's like, you don't even know me.
Right.
Even in this time, like, you weren't talking to me when I first got here and asking, am I okay? A black professor showing up in a white space. You should have asked me then. But you're going to ask me now. It's like, I was already worried about getting killed.
Right.
I was already worried about leaving my job at night.
I see. You're talking about all the people who suddenly remembered that
in your inbox.
right.
and-
It's like, no, I'm not.
Yeah.
Right. And we haven't spoken for 10 years. So
There you go.
Yep.
I'm just saying.
That is, I mean, that's real, right? Just to add on to the space thing, I remember a few years ago I worked at Lincoln Park Middle School, and I went into the cafeteria to grab something, and I got yelled at in the cafeteria because a few of the ladies that worked in there thought that I was a student. And this is middle school. I don't think I look like a middle schooler, but that was an experience.
Brown should be looking grown.
Right? I don't know. So that just, you
Right,
know,
but that's a
that-
documented phenomenon, right? White people have no idea how old black people are.
Yeah,
They don't know that they're young. They don't know that they're old. We're all just roughly somewhere between the ages of 15 and 47.
That's real. Right?
You see it time and time again.
But everything that you all were just saying, there was a powerful statement made in the documentary. Someone said, Duluth values whiteness. Right? Was that you?
I thought we were
Were you
voting.
agreeing? Oh, as
Because
in,
I'm
like,
yes.
as I was like, I
like
know you were in the documentary, but I don't know if
It's like,
you were the one that
it's
said
like
it.
Jeopardy. It's like, what is yes? What is yes? Okay. I mean,
But just listening to you all, like, it's very clear, right? And I feel like as black people, as black folks, it's clear to us how we can move away from this narrative, right? It's like, do these things, and then, you know, we won't be here, right? What are some of those things that the city could do better at?
black
Everything?
spaces. Black spaces.
That's very important here.
Black spaces. and I'll say this from the academic side of me. Y'all don't want to see the community side of me because he a little much. But the academic side of me, when we were doing our studies, helping to identify ways to help African American men to improve their overall health care and their overall health experience, their personal health experience, we were trying to just find a space they would be comfortable in. And nothing. Historic black spaces were historic black spaces. They weren't current black spaces. And then everything else was like, we ended up like in a pub. We ended up in a bar. Because that was the only space that was neutral enough, but was familiar enough with this group of black men that we could get them together consistently. We don't have barbershops here. Healthcare models around the country have really, for men, have black men nucleated around these neighborhood barbershops. We just recently in this past year have gotten a barbershop that's at least urban, but we can't call it a black space because it's not even in a black space. And that by itself changes the whole psyche about what it means to be in that space. It's like you don't own anything there. Now what? Who are you? And that's always been an issue for black folks in America.
That reminds me, I literally just saw a video of a young woman speaking on, and I was sharing it with you, just that phrase you said, we don't own anything, and she was speaking about the, the burning of buildings in Minneapolis, and a lot of people are saying, why are you building, your spaces? And it's like, it's not ours, it's not ours. Whenever we've tried to build something that was ours, right, it's been taken from us in very horrific ways, right? When we think of Tulsa and we think of Black Wall Street, we think of all of those things,
Let's talk about Wilmington too. Let's not let people forget that democratically elected government that just happened to be full of black people was violently overthrown by white people.
Yep.
Overthrown, revolt in the United States. And somehow nobody ended up in jail. So, yeah, sounds familiar.
I'd like to see some institutions greet white supremacy, sort of ordinary, what we consider classic old school white supremacy, with the same hostility that they greet, say, black people jaywalking.
With tackling and body slams?
Sure.
Okay.
I'd be okay with that. I have talked to young people, kids between the ages of 12 and 18. I've talked to college students between the ages of 18 and 25. I've talked to adults. And time again, there's this phenomena where everybody is shocked and appalled by something, but aren't actually going to do anything in response to it, except state that they are shocked and appalled. They're not going to do things that actually resolve the sort of overarching issue. And what they're going to do instead is recommend that those folks develop resiliency. That's the phrasing that they use, especially for children these days. I prefer assimilated because I feel like it's more honest about teaching people to understand their place. The thing that I've become sort of deeply concerned about is the failure to recognize that the casual ignoring of this kind of ordinary, everybody agrees upon despicable white supremacy in institutions like schools is telling a very explicit story about what your place is. The issue isn't, we're not telling you to develop resilience because it's good for you. We want you to develop resilience because the point is this is what your whole life is going to be like.
Get used to it.
So you need to start learning the skills that you need to be able to navigate that now. And like Glenn was saying earlier, you wake up at some point much later and realize that you're a particular person that you might not be if the world had been just a little bit more attuned to tolerate just whatever your sort of neutral, ordinary presence was. Assimilation makes you into a thing, and you have to live with that thing. As a grown person, I don't spend too much time thinking about it because it can't be fixed. But I'm a very particular person, and I can see very clearly now that that is not an accident, and that I might not have turned out this way. I don't dislike the person I am now, but I sometimes at the fringes I can see a better person.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll say, to add on to that last part, because there's something so, if you're familiar with the idea of the Manchurian candidate, that you are a programmed being, and given the right cue, you know what to do, even if you don't know. The double consciousness of being in a room and being able to know exactly what everybody else is thinking, and then be able to act according to that perceived thought, and usually be right. I'm generally scared all the time as a man, not necessarily for myself, but for those I'm responsible for. Now, there's a certain amount I'm scared for myself. Like, there are parts of Duluth, there are parts of Minnesota I don't go through unless I'm going a certain speed, you know, usually a legal speed, but pretty briskly either way, right? And that is because of the system. That as a man, able-bodied man, that I could probably whoop anybody if I needed to, unless they, like, you know, a big UFC fighter. I'm gonna lose. I'm gonna pick up a brick. But to think that I'm always required to be fearful and always prepared to lower my head so I can make it home. Like, that's exactly what you're talking about. It's like you look back, it's like, I mean, I think I'm awesome, but I'm also scared on the inside a lot.
Right. And those are skills. That's the other thing. The narrative that, you know, I don't know if this is what Daniel was alluding to earlier, that black folk aren't smart, that black folk don't understand the rules, that black folk don't understand the system. All you do all day is understand the system.
Yeah.
It's air and water to see, oh, this person is going to respond to me this way. I need to do this. This person's going to take this the wrong way. I need to do this. These people are going to send me death threats. Cool. We see all the angles because we have to.
Right.
But again, I would like to have had the opportunity to be a little bit dumber.
I get
That's
that.
real.
It's a weird statement to make, but I understand entirely. You know, and even the idea of, you know, representing a people anytime you open your mouth, and even with the work that I'm doing right now, and I don't know how wide this is gonna go into the enters of net, but I was pretty deliberate about making sure that I got involved in trying to do something to help deal with the current pandemic, because I knew that in Duluth, Minnesota, who would have thought that a black man would be involved in trying to solve this? Like, why not? Let's do it. Let's see what happens. But then let's see how many people actually support it right here. And surprisingly enough, not many. You know, and I joke about that, but at the same time, it's like, okay, so we're worried about this, but we're not really worried about it. I don't think you guys are necessarily abandoning the idea that this pandemic is important, but maybe you're abandoning me. Maybe you don't want to be involved with it because it's me. I don't know, but I have to process all of those things no matter what.
Right.
Because that is the reality. I'm sitting here fighting to figure out who's going to actually have my back and who's going to try to sabotage me.
Right. And sometimes you have to think about a project in terms of, is my black face's attachment to this project going to make it better or is it going to make it worse?
Yep.
I don't know, that just made me think about, you know, like tokenizing, you know, is another thing. You know, I was talking to Daniel this morning because we were talking about another panel, and it was suggested that this particular person should do the panel because they've done it before. You know what I mean? And I feel like very often in this community, white folks get very used to who's doing the work or whose faces they're seeing, that they're not giving even opportunity for other people to step into place, right? So because you see Sandra moderating, right, or hosting something, right, now when you need a person of color or you need a black person, right, to fill in that space for you, oh, let's reach out to Sandra because, you know, and then it's a consistent thing, right? But who else are you giving an opportunity for in this community? Because there's a ton of other people that, if empowered, you know, if given the platform, would be able, right, and capable to do some of the things that you're continuously going to the same individuals for.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
But we like that person because they're comfortable and they don't
They're
make
acceptable.
don't make us nervous.
They're
and
acceptable.
They do it the right way.
They're
I
just
was
so
gonna say
good.
something that I
They're so
probably
good.
shouldn't
They're so good.
They're
Oh my
so
God, they're
good.
so good.
They're so articulate.
That's another conversation. We have no platforms for, like just again, back to UMD, I don't know why, but just colleges, right? You have high school, you have college. There is no actively participatory programs that are looking here in Duluth to train folks to be within to like move within those different institutions, like upward. Go for it.
No, I mean,
Oh, is that you just raising your
no,
hand
I
again?
mean,
and
because
you're
again,
acting
that's another thing.
Yes,
It's like,
and I think that's how tokenism becomes a thing,
Right.
is because it's like you're comfortable and you know that this person is already familiar and you know that it's going to reduce the time frame. And so, yes, I could look at it from a business perspective and like quantifying perspective and like justify it with that. I could. But the thing is, why we keep setting ourselves up just for the now, especially in Duluth? Why are we always setting ourselves just for the now? And then we're not looking at who's going to do it? What we're going to train? Who's going to become, like, how many opportunities can we create for more folks?
absolutely, absolutely.
Well, I mean, in our defense, on the stage are people who have been doing that, right? Who've been trying to. I have, you know,
Absolutely. People of color.
I've been working for the last couple of years to really start to figure out how we can make sure that the young people in this town are not assimilated.
Right.
They get the skills, but they understand that it doesn't matter. It's a game. It's a game, and you play it, and you can stop playing it whenever you want. And it doesn't tell you anything about who you are or what your value is. And you don't have to be a pawn in white supremacy. You can be the queen.
You know, the thing, and the reason I raised my hand when I'm very enthusiastic about a point. So since I've gotten here, so I am a product of training programs. I am a product of very strong mentorship. I'm also the product of a very almost crazy black mama, okay? But that was also an example of mentorship for me. It's like, you have to be very involved. And so a colleague and myself, another person of color, a black woman, you know, in the College of Pharmacy, we came together and we said, we have to have longitudinal mentorship. We can't have this, oh, you showed up to college, now we want to help you. It's like, no, it's too late by then. The psychological damage is already done. So let's start as early as we can possibly start to bring them all the way through until they get to where they're trying to go. Because that's what mentorship is.
Yep.
That it's a big thing now. It's like, oh, you're gonna have a mentor. You're an assistant professor. You need a mentor. Oh, you're going up for full professor. You're gonna have, like, you're basically talking about people who have already made it in some respect and still needing mentorship. You don't think the babies need that? And they do. And so we came up with a proposal, laid it out. It's like, all right, we want to do this because we know that this is going to help with health disparities, because we just got through spending 2 years with all these black men and women, these families, asking questions, and they're all wanting to be involved, but they don't have any way in to even understand the system that is oppressing them through a mostly benign neglect, because a lot of times the system just don't care,
Right.
and just bulldoze you.
Yeah.
And we see that happen. So we're saying, let's get more people in various aspects of healthcare. We can get more phlebotomists, more people that are receptionists, because we already know that if you have a black person in that building, in that room, the experience completely changes for a patient, usually for the better. It's like, hey, you know, that doctor, you know, this is what he was actually saying. It's like, oh, okay. Or it's like, you got what now? Let's get you straight. I've seen it happen. because I've been in those hospitals where it's all black doctors and they know what's going on. You don't have to have a long drawn out conversation. It's not a culture gap, but we're talking about getting everybody a chance to get in at the ground floor. That proposal's gone nowhere. So now there's all these things coming out from the top of the University of Minnesota. I hope this don't get me in trouble. I ain't really talking bad about the University of Minnesota, but I'm just telling people how it go.
How about encouraging them to take advantage of resources and opportunities that are in place already?
But we already know. We put everything together. We put it up there. We put it on the table. It's on the desk. It's in that inbox, and it sits.
But today, when we're getting all of the emails about how everybody is so deeply saddened and how everybody is so deeply committed, it just remind you, like, oh,
you know that proposal I just gave you?
Go back.
Deeply committed.
It's right here. It's not that expensive.
You
Talk
should just
about
like
being
send that
deeply
again
committed.
when you get that. Like just
and that's what we're
forward
going,
that
and
again.
that's exactly what we're going to do.
Yes.
But
Oh, Daniel, you were trying to tell me earlier how much time we have. Just tell me.
15 minutes.
Oh, boy.
About 5 minutes ago.
Oh, I've been really enjoying this.
Okay.
Thank you all.
So I am going to switch gears right now for these last 5 minutes and focus on kind of the current events. Actually, I probably have two more questions. We might go a little past. But the question is about policing, right? In this time, over and over, we've seen the videos. We've seen the videos of, young folks being beaten in schools, to men being shot on streets, to we have the video, right? We have the evidence that there is a lot wrong, right, with the system of policing. And a lot of people have been calling for defunding, right, abolishing. I think a lot of people, when they hear abolishing, become very afraid of what that looks like. I think that for most people, they're like, oh, they're trying to send us into like a lawless state where there's no protection, you know what I mean? But what is that? What does that really mean for people that don't understand what abolishing the police looks like? What does that mean, and what does it look like in society? Or what could it look like?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'm sorry, did you want to say something?
No. Go ahead.
So the police are a security force. That's their fundamental role. They are folk who are authorized to use violence to impose authority. That's who we're sending when people have heart attacks. That's where we're sending when people have mental health crises. That's who we're sending when people have drug overdoses. That's where we're sending to do well checks. That's who we're sending to resolve, to mediate between mild disputes between parties in public spaces. We're sending an armed security force to solve all of those problems. Now, this is just a peculiarity of mine, and I recognize that not everybody shares this, but I'm the kind of person who likes to use the right tool for a job. My partner is the kind of person who will use a butter knife for all jobs, even if at the end of that the butter knife is no good. That's not me. I want to find the right tool, the tool that actually does the work, the tool that's designed to do the work. We have become accustomed and have allowed ourselves to live in a community, in communities, in cultures where we're sending a hammer for jobs that require a screwdriver, for jobs that require an awl, for jobs that require a nurse. We're sending a hammer for all of those jobs. People who are overwhelmingly obsessed with the idea of police as a security force fail to recognize that that's exactly what's wrong. Exactly what's wrong is that most of the problems that police spend a lot of their time addressing do not require a security force. That there are community members, there are learned and certified folk who can do a lot of these jobs, and do a lot of these jobs in other contexts for civil service pay. We don't need to be throwing all of that money at men with guns. And I'm a person who has a parent with dementia. And as a consequence of his illness, was routinely having security forces showing up at his house. He didn't need a security force.
Mm-hmm.
He needed mental health care. He needed a social worker. I would so much rather have a community where there was a number I could call and send out a social worker. A social worker, a good social worker, is a beautiful thing. I would so much rather call 911 and get a social worker than get an armed man.
Yeah.
That's right.
No, I definitely, like, yeah, all that. I mean, there's something to be said about the idea of the current norm being acceptable, first and foremost. To say that, why do we need to change it? That in and of itself makes me question exactly who you are, if you are questioning it. Mm-hmm. And I'm from the South, and one of the things that I have learned to appreciate, as insidious as it can be, as just horrible to think about, is the openness of racism in the South. And now we're starting to see a lot more people that we didn't know were actually racist are showing themselves to be racist. Because if you're not saying something against it, you're for it. That's all there is to it. There is no gray area. There is no in between. There's no fence. It's racist, not racist, or anti-racist. You're fighting it. And the idea of changing, whether you say abolish, whether you say defund, changing fundamentally this idea of policing in the United States of America, it's an absolute necessity because the origins of the institution are completely tainted. And then when we look at the world stage, we know that there are so many other ways of doing it. The one peculiarity of being in the United States is the fact that we have the right to bear arms. So therefore, if every citizen has the right to bear arms, of course, now you have an armed security force. If they're going to enforce something, they have to be able to enforce with equal or more force, which again, it's an arms race now. But I think we have to rethink it, and at the very least, think about it at a community level. It doesn't make sense for anybody to be able to come into my community or anyone else's community that is not a part of that community. It doesn't make sense. It's actually kind of insane that you, as an American, will allow someone who is not a part of your community to tell you what to do. That's actually anti-American.
But
when
I
you
mean,
think about it.
isn't that what we do overseas?
But that's when you're at war. That's when you're actually. So are we at
we
war?
at war?
So are we at war is now the question, because we have police and riot gear, military grade gear, using it on citizens.
And we have that in Duluth now too, right?
Oh yeah, I remember seeing their tactical vehicles roaming the streets, and unfortunately they looked all too enthusiastic about using it.
Right. Special gear you put on so that you can engage with people who are peacefully assembling.
Even if they're not peacefully assembling, they don't have the same gear. So what are you planning on doing to them?
Right. I mean, it's an instant escalation. Right. Like,
exactly.
no
That's
matter,
all you're asking.
Right.
You're asking them to get something more to deal with what you have now.
It's like, oh, I see. Okay. Right. And this is the thing that I find, wow, it's completely not understandable how the narrative is that Black folk act up when all the time we're confronted by people with guns. All the time we're confronted by people who are dressed for war. And then the narrative is, why didn't you stay calm? Why didn't I stay calm? They showed up with guns. I was calm. I was good. And then they showed up with guns.
And you're right. And no one who has never experienced that type of fear response can comment. Unless you are constantly in fear of your child dying, unless you are constantly in fear of not being able to make it home, as a parent who at times is the only parent around with their child, I can't leave my child anywhere because I may not make it home. That is a real calculated thing that I have to process. Until you're in that space, you shouldn't even comment. You should just be quiet.
That's real. That's real. And I have to do this. I didn't really quite get that signal. Sounds good. Thank you. Thank you. I have to double check y'all.
Yep.
Yeah, I think your both of your just explanation on what that looks like and what that is and why that the system of policing that we have right now is insane, like you said, Glenn. I have so many
Really good question.
really good questions that I could really end this with, and I'm like trying to decide. But in kind of the spirit of the times, I think that, like I said, people are asking for there to be a change and for there to be not just conversation of that change, right? But for there to actually be a change. And I think that in terms of what's going on right now, right, the outcry, by the protesting, the outcry of people who for generations, right, for centuries have not been able to make decisions, or just honestly simply have not been able to breathe, right? Just simply put, have not been able to exist in peace, to exist and just be. I'm curious on your thoughts of what reconciliation and healing look like. Especially in terms, we're thinking of this community, we're thinking of 100 years later from Clayton, Jackson, and McGhie, and we're thinking of the current state and everything that continues still today, right? The modern day lynching, right, of Black people. What does reconciliation and healing look like on a national level? And even if we're just talking about, as a city, right? How do we get there? How do we move forward? And I'm a strong believer that we can't move forward without healing, right? And that us as Black folks, we've never really had an opportunity to fully heal because we're constantly re-traumatized and we're constantly put in positions where we're always in, we're always having to fight for something, right? Whether it's our life, whether it's our health, whether it's for food, it doesn't matter what it is. We're always at this state, right? And when you're in that state of constant struggle, right, there's no time to heal, right? But I'm a strong believer that in order for us to move forward, that time, that space needs to be given. So what does that look like to you all?
I'm gonna go quick.
Quick? Are you sure?
Well, I don't know about quick, you know that. But healing to me it's like multi-layered. It looks like many different things. But in this space, especially Duluth, one thing that we need to start on a more holistic level, not just the Black community, is there will not be any healing till we recognize that the 10,000 people who came out to lynch Clayton, Jackson, McGhie that was 100 years ago, still have kids and kids that are still here that were taught the same rhetoric of white supremacy. So there would not be healing till we could outly recognize that that's here. One thing that I was really happy about is one of our tech guys here, the awesome Dan Benoit, I believe his partner had made a website about the KKK folks who applied for the KKK or had KKK applications in Duluth in 1920.
I saw that map.
And they created a map for it. We have shared it on Facebook. And when you go to that map and you look at it, I mean, for me, I feel like, why does it have to take someone to sit down and organize this shit? Sorry about my language. Before we could even have it. Why isn't this something that the city, the people here who want healing, who want change, could upfrontly begin to put up? And I'm not talking about just, I mean, obviously if you're in the KKK, you're not going to be the one heading that cause. But the fact is, I'm talking about the folks who are not applied to the KKK, but are still buying into white supremacy and are doing social justice work. I think that's where the energy needs to be put into. I think white bodies need to be able to bring out those secret conversations that I had and brought that to public so people know that they're not crazy living in Duluth. Because Duluth, you could live here thinking you're crazy, that something is happening to you. And all the white folks will be like, oh, really that happened to you? And you're like, you know that happened to you because you know folks, they talk like that in your family. And that's the truth is, in this space, black folks feel that way. I feel like sometimes, like, why? Why am I here? So healing for me here looks like confrontation of truth. Truth has to come to the open. We can't stop lying to each other. It will be hard. It takes a while. It's going to take time. In terms of holistic truth, in terms of like a larger number of people healing. So the path I take to healing, the path I encourage people to take to healing is a little different now from waiting for the government to give us something or for institutions to make a change. I take it personal. I think we all should take a personal path to healing for ourselves. If you're a black and brown person and you see yourself in spaces like this, it is okay to check out at some point and figure stuff out for you, and to start learning for yourself, like, what are my boundaries in this space? Where am I going to go? Where am I not going to go? Where am I going to spend my energy? How much of myself will I put into a space? Those are real questions to have for healing purposes. And then for white bodies in this space, to really look back at their own history and confront the harsh realities in a honest way. And that might mean some trauma walk, some real deep trauma walk or work. And I think that then begins to help them facilitate how they could come up with ideas of how they could make more generalized healing spaces between themselves. So I think doing the work when it comes to social justice is one aspect, but I feel like if we could continue to bring black and brown buddies and white buddies into social justice work without confronting healing, it could also become very toxic, and it could also become something that could potentially cause a lot more deeper friction that we can't necessarily handle. So I think from the individual level, we all should take healing seriously, personally. Make it a personal goal. There's nothing selfish about thinking about healing from a personal perspective. Then, as we think collectively, be honest about what you want. If a white body comes to you and say, look, I need you to do this, and you're so used to saying yes, it's okay to say no. Till you figure this shit out over here, I can't do this. I think that's a way of challenging white people too, to be able to see that they have to confront certain aspects of their own life. As a collective, as black people within the black community, I think our healing is very important. I'll continue to call to my community to consider all the aspects of how we've been treated. I talk from an African perspective. I came from Africa, so I always come from this idea that I don't know what it's like. I don't have the generational lineage of what it feels like to live in this space for so long. But what I know is, even with the trauma of colonialism in Africa, that those traumas of colonialism, even in Africa, we as Africans have not began to look in the mirror and challenge that to heal, even in Africa. So from when I come here and I see how things are going, it even makes me to want to make this call bigger than just here in the United States. For us as black and brown bodies everywhere around the world to begin to see how we've been bamboozled by white supremacy in every aspect of living, and beginning to call ourselves to say, no, we're not going to outstretch ourselves for white ideals, white methods, and we're not going to, in some forms, tokenize ourselves without our own communities, our brothers, our sisters, our families. And I think that call makes us wake up to our own individual trauma and challenge ourselves to fight that, because it's not going to be easy within the black community too to find healing for each other, which is why we fight each other a lot when also we have the bigger systems on our necks. We now look at each other, and since it's easier to fight someone that is on your same level than someone who's stepping on you. So that's what I call to, is we all need healing. We should make it an individual quest first, because I cannot speak to systemic healing without confrontation and truth. And those things, I don't see it happening anytime soon. And I don't want to feel hopeless about it. But I think the way to challenge that is to call our boundaries, to stand our ground, and to say enough is enough. Even in this space, healing looks like protest. Healing looks like saying, I can't take this stuff anymore. Healing looks like screaming. Healing looks like saying, you know what, I'm going to quit my job. Healing looks like different forms. And I want to give people permission to take that challenge to say, look,
you are not the end product of what you think. All of this, like, free yourself by knowing that you have the power to change the dynamic of how you move in spaces. You've been given that freedom. So take it, even if someone wants to take it from you, if they want to marginalize you for it, even if they're coming to kill you for it. At the end of the day, what else are we living for if we're not going to challenge ourselves that we want this healing so bad?
I want to say something about the trauma of imperfection. Daniel's talking about the fact that one of the problems that we have is that one of the sort of fundamental features of contemporary whiteness, in this millennium, in this century, is the ability to not deal, to escape from the history, to escape from it by not knowing it, to escape from it by having your not knowing reinforced at every turn. That people don't understand that, like, security forces like the contemporary policing in the United States starts with people whose job it was to round up escaped slaves. So there is this tremendous amount of trauma that has to be taken up in recognizing the multiple features of complicity in white supremacy that you might have, even if you are an earnestly and deeply well-intentioned white person. And I think that a significant part of that is people's unwillingness to live in this space of moral imperfection. I was listening to Glenn talk earlier about being here for 3 years. I was listening to a podcast on Duluth lynching on my way over here. And Teresa Moses was talking about the fact that it was mentioned that Teresa Moses joined the Duluth NAACP a week after she came to town. Glenn is an assistant professor, which is a vulnerable position, and has been actively engaged in activist work despite that fact, despite the vulnerability and the incredible small number of black folk at UMD in general and American-born black folk specifically at UMD. So I came here 9 years ago, and I kept my head down. I wanted to get tenure because I wanted to give my parents that pride, and I wanted to make my immediate family secure. And I did anti-racist work, but I did it in a very small, very careful, very localized way that did not put me in jeopardy. And I'm ashamed. And I have to live with that. But I think one of the hard things that the white community in Duluth and in Minnesota and in the United States has to accept is that you can live with that moral imperfection. It will not kill you. You will survive. You can live in that space of being imperfect, of being unsatisfactory. Because if you don't, what you have to do in order not to is just sustain white supremacy. So let it go. Let yourself be imperfect. Because you won't die from it. And if you're unsure of the truth of that, just ask any black person in America, and they can tell you about what it's like to live with all of the contradictions and challenges of being perceived as imperfect, of accepting your imperfections, and of trying to walk through with your head up and your shoulders back despite it. You can do it. And if you try, we will be here. Because I also think that there's this narrative that protesting that is sort of part of the narrative that's used in various conservative circles, that black people are angry and that our anger is dangerous. I think black people's anger is loving. I think black people's anger is reconciliatory. It is about balancing the books and making things right. And about calling home. So I think that coming to terms with the imperfections of our history It's something that can be done, and you won't die.
I'm going to try my best not to overlap with too much of the points of my friends up here. I think first, we have to understand that racism, white supremacy is the result of fear. It's fear. It's fear-based. It's fear of an unknown. It's fear of a perceived and maybe at times an actual lacking of something. And what we've seen, and corporate America is really good for actually pointing at this, because every time you put a diverse team of individuals together against a non-diverse team of individuals, and you have them compete to complete some ornate, complicated task, the diverse team tends to do better. Now, diversity is a bunch of different things: diversity of thought, experiences, but also ethnic origin and lived experiences, right? So we know that to be true when it comes to money. Time and time again, that's always the case. That's one of the reasons why the United States actually became the superpower that it is. It's a diverse country at its core because you had a lot of black bodies here. Okay, let's just say that. But then we also have to look at the history of places like South Africa that came out of apartheid, which was a very strongly structured, systematic form of racism and white supremacy. And before they could even move beyond it, the bodies had to be counted. And if we're not willing to do that, then there's no point in us having a conversation at all. There's no point in a protest and people saying, oh, we're going to abolish this, we're going to do this, because that's just the beginning of the conversation. The damage is just the beginning of the conversation. The idea of people being in solidarity with black folks is just the beginning. We have to be willing to, as everyone else has said, be willing to deal with and face our demons, but also be willing to destroy some things that we've always had. Some things just have to go because they are a part of the system. They will never be changed because the system isn't designed for that. And we may end up hurting people. Some people may find themselves in a very compromised position because if we do anything by any of the good books that may exist out there in the spiritual world, everything has to be balanced. Lives have to be balanced. Because if a man who has a family of 4 dies during his prime earning years, that's income that's lost, which then affects the outcome of the children, which affects where they start their adult life. That has to be accounted for. So when people say, well, we don't think reparations make sense, it's like, okay, then pay for every life of every man, woman, and child who was extinguished by not natural causes, by undue force. At the very least, let's talk about that. Because if we can have those conversations, then I might believe the rhetoric of all of those who are in power now, who say—
we're not even talking about mass incarceration, right? To throw that in there too.
Because that's a part of it.
Exactly.
Let's balance those things because we know that the law isn't enforced equally. So there's so many layers of our system that has to be thrown out for us to have the conversation. And I want those people to be at the table. If CCA isn't at the table, if the various governors who have to somehow sign off on these prisons being in their states aren't at the table, we're not having a conversation that's going to shift the power dynamic, because that's our issue. Because the police wouldn't exist and be able to do what they do if the power dynamic was equitable across all parties. Black people in America have never had a similar power dynamic to whites or anyone else in America. And every time they did, Wilmington is the example I like to go to, because unlike a Black Wall Street, we're talking about elected government being overthrown by racism and white supremacy versus just a community, just a part of town. But literally, this is your mayor, and you're trying to kill him. And no one does anything about it. No one in the government, the National Guard doesn't show up. Everybody just pretends like it didn't happen. And the reason why I think it's so insidious, it's so just vile, is that when they write the history of it, they don't even admit to it. if you would admit to you trying to kill every black person you see, I would at least then say, I understand that you're evil. But you're not willing to say that that's what we did. You were the friend of the Negro, they say. I don't have any friends that try to kill me. So that's the part where we have to say, if we don't label things accordingly, we'll never get them right. We know that in the beginning, we had to have Adam, had to name everything, right? And in that, you have the power. But they're calling everything that we do something else. And now we're all confused. Blacks and whites alike. Nobody knows what the hell is going on because we're saying that the things that are violent are just and the things that are just are violent. So that's where we have to get to. And until then, I think the idea of protesting, the idea of rioting is always going to be on the table for those who have no power.
It makes me think of, I had this conversation with Daniel a little while ago, just thinking of like folks who are like extreme racist, you know, like, believe in fully in the ideology of white supremacy, and in terms of healing, right? And I feel like oftentimes when we talk about healing, we're talking about healing for victims, right? It's like, oh, this person went through this, they need to heal, right? But at the same time, there needs to be healing for perpetrators.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
And until that healing really, really happens, the cycle just continues.
Absolutely.
Right?
Absolutely.
Because we all want to see ourselves as good, right? And if I tell you, Glenn, you're a bad person, everything within yourself is trying to convince
Reject
yourself
it.
that you're not a bad person, you're a good person, and this is why you're good, right? So for me to tell a white person, hey, you're a racist, you're this is what your history is, right? This is the trauma you've caused, right? This is the pain that, different groups of people have faced because of you. Black folks, Native folks, if I lay all of that for you, right? There's this part of you that wants to retreat and say, no, this it's because of this, because the white race is superior, right?
It was the times.
Right?
It was the times.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Or it's the times, or that was then, and literally it wasn't
Right.
it wasn't then, right?
But I'm good.
Right? But I'm good, right? So there's a healing that needs to take place, and until that healing starts, and exactly what you all have said, right? The acknowledgement first, right? Acknowledging that truth, right? Saying that, this is what it is, rather than, hiding it, right? Because when you hide things, that means what? That it's wrong, right? If you're hiding it, it must be wrong, right? But if you can say it openly, then, like you said, either you're evil or you're on the side of good. I don't know. But I don't know. That just,
Right.
Yeah.
Let's all just
Kinda
be
played.
okay trying to be better.
Right. Right.
Nobody has to be good because you're not. You can be okay trying to be better.
exactly.
We all come up short, for sure. You're absolutely right.
Exactly.
And to your point, Sandra, the concept that you bring up reminds me of something that was written by I'm going to mess up his name, so I'm not going to say it, but it's called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And the concept that I took out of this was that the oppressor can never teach the oppressed how to be human. That is the job of the oppressed. So, like you said, the oppressor has to be healed. We have to understand that something in them, those who are oppressing, is messed up somehow. And it has to be fixed. We have to be fixed because I've been in a lot of pain. I need trauma surgery. You need to be fixed because you need maybe a lobotomy. Who knows what it takes? But that has to be addressed. We can't say that, okay, you who run the system, please give us permission to be human. It doesn't work like that. It has to be, you who run the system, move the hell out the way so we can show you how to teach people to be human. And then maybe you'll learn too. But if you don't, we'll at least know who you are and put you in your place accordingly. Because everybody's not going to be good. But we have to acknowledge, again, that, okay, you're not good, we're all trying to get better. Now, do you want to heal? Because we're here for you. And I think that's one of the things that's important about understanding all of the idea of humanity, is that we should be able to embrace each other from those differences that we have culturally by recognizing our humanity and that willingness to move to a higher level, a level of wholeness collectively, even with those differences. You might not like what I eat. I might not like what you eat, but I want you to be healthy. So I'll give you the best of what I got. And can we at least admit to that?
Thank you. Well, we will wrap things up there. I just want to thank you both for being here. Daniel as well, who's on daddy duty in the corner over there. Thank you for being here, for sharing your perspective. I think you've given a lot for people to think of, for myself to think of, right? I'm sure that we're going to continue to process these conversations as the day continues, as the weeks and whatever else. But yeah, thank you all for tuning in and being a part of this conversation. I don't know, Daniel, if you want to share anything. I know you've been out off in the corner with.
Tomorrow there is an event, I think, at Zenit Bookstore. It is a conversation with the guy who wrote the book, The Duluth Lynchings. I think it's Michael Frito. Yeah, and so feel free. I think I don't know if I think it's virtual, but go to the CJMM page and check out the event.
There's an event page,
and follow that. Also, June 10th is coming up, June 19th, and it's gonna be Friday. There's gonna be a protest, and get out there if you can. If you can't, make phone calls, write letters to your mayors and your government.
Do that
bold.
anyway.
Do something bold. Just think of something bold that you could do, and make June 19th a day that not only calls for systemic accountability, but for yourself to kind of make a challenge for yourself to do something. And I just want to thank the folks in this space. It's a high definition space. I just heard about this space about literally a month ago. And I didn't even know what it was till my friend Jacob Bell hit me up just a few weeks ago. And then we talked to Dan Benoit and then Ali Oliveira. Great people in this community. And the other guys, I think Troy, and I forgot the last person's name. Joe. Yeah. These folks held us down. They created a stage for artists of color today to do music and also to do this panel. And to be honest, they're not even charging for it, but of course, God willing, we'll pay them still. This is a real reality. We're doing on live TV. And so that's what it is. We appreciate everyone who puts their energy, their effort, their thought, because just that ability to say, I want to do something and not just sit home and feel paralyzed, but decide I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it because it's going to make a difference. I think that's what we're talking about in this times. George Floyd's life, Breonna Taylor, everyone who's dying have died, even Clayton, Jackson, and McGhie. Let their death not just be what it is, because we have a kid in our arms. We have families to worry about. And we know that if things don't change, they'll have to face that. And we'll have to fight for them too. So that should even be enough motivation to some extent. Just let's not turn our faces away. Thank you all.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody.